سخن سردبیر، نویسنده و گوینده فرید امین الاسلام. بعد از استقبال گسترده از ارائه فرم چندرسانه‌ای یا مولتیمدیای شماره اول مجله هنرآگه، شماره دوم آن که به دوره باروک اختصاص دارد را تقدیم می‌کنیم. باروک دوران مهمی در تاریخ هنر و تاریخ اجتماعی است. دورانی پر از تنوع و البته پر از جنگ و دیکتاتوری و سرکوب سیاسی. باروک یک وضعیت بود که باید همه جوانب آن در همه عرصه‌های هنری، فرهنگی و اجتماعی مورد بررسی قرار گیرد. در شماره دوم مجله چندرسانه‌ای هنرآگه سعی کردیم تا حد مقدور و در حوزه هنر نقاشی و مجسمه به این مهم بپردازیم. در زمان خود کلمه باروک به معنای عجیب و غریب، پر زرق و برق و تزیین شده بود. با این حال مورخان از این کلمه برای نشان دادن سبک خاصی در تمام اشکال مختلف هنری استفاده کردند. دوره باروک همچنین به عنوان عصر مطلق گرایی شناخته می شود، زیرا بسیاری از حاکمان مختلف آن زمان از قدرت مذهبی و حاکمیتی خود برای کنترل رعایای خود استفاده کردند. به عنوان مثال در آلمان دوک وایمار یوهان سباستیان باخ معروف را به مدت 1 ماه به زندان انداخت. فقط به این دلیل که باخ خواستار ترک شغل خود به عنوان نوازنده دوک شده بود. در اروپا به سال 1527 میلادی سلطه مذهبی این قدرت را داشت که محتوا و جو تولیدات هنری جامعه را هدایت کند. در آن زمان کلیسای کاتولیک با واکنش شدید علیه اصلاحات پروتستان‌ها محافظه‌کارانه مجبور شد تا حمیت و عظمت خود را در جامعه دوباره تثبیت کند. هنرمندان با احیای ایدئال‌های زیبایی رنسانس در آثار هنری، موسیقی و معماری آن دوران اشاره‌ای دوباره به کلاسیک گرایی کردند که با ولخرجی جدید و میل به آراستگی‌های بیشتر تقویت شد و باروک ابداع شد و با تکنیک‌ها و جزئیات نوآورانه‌اش زبان بصری تازه‌ای را در دوره‌ای پرآشوب به هنر ارائه کرد.
At no other time in the history of art were there so many currents and cross-currents, so many varieties and contradictions as in the period called Baroque, a time of roughly 150 years, from about 1590 up until about 1740. It emerged from Mannerism, the preceding art period, and dissipated in the Rococo. Baroque painting embraced all kinds of subjects: mythology, history, religion, still life, landscapes, and portraits. It was marked by contrast between tumultuous battle scenes and quiet landscapes. The Baroque, as a period of history, embraced 3 fairly distinct artistic trends, which mix and mingle with confusing frequency: classicism, the High Baroque, and naturalism. If I were forced to describe High Baroque art in one word, I'd say either exciting or dramatic, though it's oftentimes both and sometimes neither. The drama is heightened by the lavish use of color and texture, life-sized or even larger figures, complex space, monumental scope, and theatrical contrasts of light and dark. All these devices are employed to bring the action close to us, to remove the aesthetic distance. High Baroque art, in effect, puts us in the stage, makes us partakers of the action, and identify personally with the characters. European artists, for convenience sake, are grouped into schools, not educational institutions, but groupings of artists whose works share a degree of similarity in style due to their residence in a particular place. One of the most important centers of painting was Bologna. This picture of Jacob holding the bloody coat of his son Joseph believing that Joseph is dead, is a very beautiful and emotional work. Guercino, whose correct name was Giovanni Francesco Barbieri, was born in 1591 and died in 1666. He was one of the strongest figures in the Italian art of the century, and is a master of the personal appeal created by the face. Also representing the School of Bologna is this head of St. Sebastian by Guido Reni. Sebastian is one of those characters who may never have existed, but nonetheless was canonized by the Catholic Church. He was supposedly a Roman officer who became a Christian and whose martyrdom was attempted by tying him to a post and using him as a target. Sebastian, or Sebastiano in Italian, was a popular subject in Baroque art, sometimes pictured with Irene, who pulled out the arrows and nursed him back to health. Also by Reni is a series of portraits of the four Gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It is said that an art dealer commissioned these paintings because he had a client who wanted to purchase the series. He kept pushing Reni to finish the group, and Reni, who was occupied with a number of projects at the time, could not give him the attention he wanted. Reni was greatly relieved when he was finally able to deliver the pictures and be rid of his pesky customer. Guido's work is considerably more classical in style than later Baroque masters, restrained both in technique and emotion, but he displays a beautiful talent that earned him the nickname of the Divine Guido. You see it especially well in the smoothly blended flesh tones, ranging from cool grays to warm pinks.
The Baroque period in art has a rather fascinating beginning. During the mid-1500s, the Catholic Church was feeling threatened by the increasing conversion of the population to Lutheranism. The Church convened the Council of Trent, which took place from 1545 to 1563. At the Council of Trent, religious reforms were being questioned, proposed, and reconsidered. Martin Luther's scathing criticism of the Church found supporters everywhere. As a response, the Church launched an advertising blitz, reiterating and reaffirming its fundamental teachings to combat the Protestant criticisms that were turning the public away from the Catholic Church. Since winning over the few educated intellectuals who were able to read at the time would not make a big difference in maintaining the power of the Catholic Church, the uneducated masses were targeted. Since the majority of people could not be reached via the written word, to inspire them to stay loyal, the Catholic Church and its teachings would require a medium that did not require literacy. The answer to this was clear. The Church embarked on a systematic religious advertising campaign using art. This marked the beginning of the Baroque era. In the 1600s, the Baroque style became prevalent among artists in Rome and Italy, and Baroque works filled with religious grandeur spread to other parts of Europe until the 1750s. Artists were now being actively encouraged to express their faith through grand and beautiful artworks. Baroque art celebrated intense personal visions, conversions, religious visions, death, and even martyrdom. The images Baroque artists created were realistic, intense, and extravagant. Vivid use of color was becoming a more dramatic feature, and the different elements and figures of a composition could be overlapped instead of being isolated in the center of the work. In its early years, the term Baroque was actually derogatory. To call something Baroque meant that it was considered overly exaggerated and filled with unflattering details like warts and wrinkles. This offended viewers and critics who were used to the painstaking realism of the Renaissance. Baroque paintings show a wide range of styles and artistic influences. They are dramatic and offer rich details, beautiful deep shades of color, and honest realism. Baroque artists typically painted pictures that captured the ultimate dramatic moments that showed unfolding events taking place in real time. You were no longer left to imagine what took place during a battle. These scenes were being depicted in excruciatingly realistic detail. In fact, you might even think of many Baroque paintings as theatrical snapshots that were shown from the perception of each individual artist. A number of artists were able to establish their reputations during the Baroque years. Among these are famous names such as Rembrandt, Rubens, Poussin, Caravaggio, Vermeer, and Velasquez. Rembrandt was a true master of Baroque art techniques. You can observe his exceptional use of light and shadows in Philosopher and Meditation, or Descent from the Cross. Today, his brilliant brushstrokes and keen eye can be seen when looking at any of the masterpieces that he created during the 17th century. Poussin's religious paintings were didactic in nature. They were meant to teach moral lessons to students and persuade them of the importance of biblical and classic mythological events. The Adoration of the Magi, depicting the three kings bearing gifts to the baby Messiah, and the Adoration of the Golden Calf, illustrating a celebration of worshippers dancing around a false idol, were two of Poussin's best-known biblical paintings, meant to help viewers contemplate lessons of Christian righteousness and sin. Poussin's work is noted for its vivid backgrounds, which include both natural landscapes and mathematically precise architecture. He is also credited with developing the theory of modes, which advises artists to use forms and methodologies specific to the work at hand. Caravaggio's Crucifixion of St. Peter is a classic example of how Baroque artists use the medium of art to skillfully tell an entire story. They evoked a spiritual response and reinstated faith in one fell swoop, without making any of this overtly evident. The piece depicts the scene where St. Peter, impaled on the crucifix, is being lifted by three Romans after his request to be positioned upside down. The eloquent body language depicted in each of the figures in this masterpiece speaks volumes about the artist's skill. The strain of lifting Peter is very evident in the stance of the three men, showing that the sheer magnitude of their crime is weighing them down. St. Peter's face is bathed in divine light, glorifying him without impinging on the drama and emotion of the scene. One thing is very clear when you look at the artwork created by these Baroque masters. Their objective was to evoke the spirituality within, to encourage the viewer to connect with the scene that was depicted, and to cement belief in God's compassion for mankind. They sought to create a scene that was larger than life, spiritual, and capable of evoking a sense of awe. All of it was done with one goal: to communicate in a grandiose, glamorous manner a strong religious message to the masses. The Rococo movement, also known as late Baroque, gradually gained momentum, and in the 1700s, this movement replaced the Baroque period. Rococo art preserved many aspects of Baroque technique, but opted for less political themes, softer and brighter colors, and a more light-hearted tone. Although the apex of the Baroque art period is now reconciled to the pages of history books, it is important to remember that these ideas and techniques continue to exert power and influence in the art of our modern world.
جنبش هنری باروک، سبک یک دوران، قسمت اول. اصطلاح باروک که از کلمه پرتغالی باروکو به معنای مروارید یا سنگ نامنظم با منطقی پیچیده گرفته شده است، به یک جنبش فرهنگی و هنری اشاره دارد که از اوایل قرن 17 تا اواسط قرن 18 مشخصه اروپا بود. باروک بر حرکت دراماتیک، اغراق‌آمیز و جزئیات واضح و قابل تفسیر آسان تاکید دارد. هنر باروک به دلیل آشفتگی سرخوشانه اغلب به عنوان عجیب و غریب یا ناهموار تعریف شده است. بنابراین آنچه تحت عنوان باروک قرار می‌گیرد آمیزه‌ای از بی‌نظمی و پیچیدگی ابهام‌آمیز است. این نکته در تعریف مندرج در فرهنگ لغت آکادمی سلطنتی فرانسه در سال 1740 میلادی نیز به چشم می‌خورد. یک چهره یا اندام به سبک باروک در مجموع نامنظم، تکلف آمیز و ناموزون است. فرانچسکو میلیتزیا، معمار ایتالیایی و تئوریسین نئوکلاسیسم، در واژه‌نامه هنرهای زیبا که در سال 1797 میلادی منتشر شد، با نوشتن این عبارت که باروک اوج تصنع و افراط در مسخرگی است، بر مفهوم منفی واژه باروک بیش از پیش تأکید کرد. با نزدیک شدن به اواسط قرن 19 دیگر تب ضد باروک فروکش کرده بود و جریانی به وجود آمده بود که باروک را به منزله سبکی مهم قلمداد می‌کرد. باروک، ریشه‌ها و ایده‌های کلیدی. کسی که در نهایت مردم را ترغیب کرد تا سبک باروک را به عنوان جریانی مثبت به حساب آورند، هاینریش ولفین، نویسنده و مورخ هنر آلمانی بود. وی در سال 1888 میلادی مقاله‌ای مهم تحت عنوان رنسانس و باروک منتشر کرد که در آن تقریباً برای اولین بار سبک باروک نه به منزله انحطاط و تنزل از شکوه و عظمت رنسانس، بلکه به مثابه سبکی مستقل با شیوه‌های بیانی خاص خود معرفی شد. دوران باروک تا حد زیادی با تأثیرات جنبش هنری اساسی که پیش از آن آمده بود، یعنی رنسانس، تعریف می‌شد، به طوری که بسیاری از محققان تاریخ هنر استدلال کردند که هنر باروک صرفاً پایان رنسانس بوده و هرگز به عنوان یک پدیده فرهنگی یا تاریخی مستقل وجود نداشته است. عده‌ای دیگر هم مخالف بوده و استدلال کردند که وقایع اصلاحات پروتستان و ویرانی‌های جنگ 30 ساله، نگرش اروپاییان و هنرمندان اروپایی و تعامل با جهان، جهت هنر و فرهنگ را تغییر داد. بنابراین باروک بیانگر تمایز آشکار از رنسانس است. این مقیاس و اهمیت محض رویدادها و همچنین سبک‌های متضاد نقاشی در طول یک دوره است که تطبیق یک فکر به سبک باروک را دشوار می‌کند. اروپا با یکی از بزرگترین تغییرات در جامعه خود مواجه شده بود، به ویژه چالش با کلیسای کاتولیک روم. با این حال از طریق هنرمندان اولیه باروک، جیان لورنزو برنینی و فرانچسکو برومینی، جنبش هنر باروک با سفارش شاهکارهای از واتیکان و محافل اجتماعی و مذهبی اطراف آن آغاز شد. حالت معماری رنسانس از حالت خطی به نقاشی تبدیل شد و افکار رنسانسی در مورد کمال، تکمیل و قابل تصور بودن با ایده‌های شدن، نقاشی بودن، بی‌پایانی و بی‌محدودیت به چالش کشیده شدند. مشخصه‌های اصلی سبک باروک عبارتند از ایجاد جذابیت هم برای عاطفه هم برای عقل با رنگ و ایجاد درام و روایت غیر خطی، ایجاد عظمت با جلوه‌های فضاسازی و نورپردازی نمایشی، استفاده از ترکیب‌های مختلف انواع هنر به شکل ترکیبی، خصوصیات منحصر به فرد سبک باروک نماینگر تناقض‌ها و نیز وحدت اصلی است که این سبک در آن متولد شد. مراکز و چگونگی گسترش. مناطق کلیدی این سبک در اروپا، فرانسه، ایتالیا، هلند و آلمان بودند. قدرتمندترین مرکز روم بود که باروک در آنجا بیشتر نمودی از تفکر کاتولیک به شمار می‌رفت. دربار هابسبورگ در اسپانیا و اتریش، مراکز فرهنگی اسپانیا در والنسیا، تولدو و مادرید، سرزمین‌های تحت الحمایه اسپانیا از جمله ناپل، لومباردی و هلند جنوبی یا فلاندرز از دیگر مناطق بودند. فرانسه به دلیل آنکه از اصالت عاطفی سبک باروک ایتالیایی پرهیز می‌کرد، تا حدودی از این جریان برکنار ماند و هنری پدید آورد که بیشتر در خور شأن سیاسی لویی 14 بود. جمهوری هلند میراثی غنی از هنر پروتستان به ویژه در زمینه نقاشی به وجود آورد که عمدتاً مربوط به طبقه متوسط بود. آلمان مسیر خاص خود را به سوی سبک فاخر اوایل قرن 18 که روکوکو نامیده شد ادامه داد. سبک‌های باروک در انگلستان، پرتغال و مستعمرات اسپانیا و پرتغال در قاره آمریکا به شدت تحت تأثیر تحولات خارجی قرار داشت. بررسی تاریخی هنر باروک کار آسانی نیست، زیرا تنوع زیاد آن کار طبقه بندی را دشوار می کند. دوره آغازین سبک باروک اواخر قرن 16 در ایتالیا ظهور کرد، در حالی که منریسم دقیقاً تا دهه دوم قرن 17 در اسپانیا و اروپای شمالی رواج داشت. از سوی دیگر جریان‌های هنری قرن 17 تا دهه اول قرن 18 در هلند ادامه پیدا کرد. گروهی از مورخان هنر برخی از آثار هنری قرن 18 را باروک متأخر و گروهی دیگر آن را روکوکو نامیدند. به علاوه عوامل اجتماعی و سیاسی گاهی به اندازه مسائل زیباشناسی در تعیین طول دوره باروک در یک ناحیه معین نقش دارند. در سال 1700 میلادی مرگ چارلز دوم به دوره باروک در اسپانیا پایان بخشید. برخی از صاحب نظران هم تاریخ پایان دوره باروک در فرانسه را سال 1715 میلادی و همزمان با مرگ لویی 14 قرار می‌دهند. خصوصیات منحصر به فرد سبک باروک نمایانگر تناقض‌ها و نیز وحدت اصلی است که این سبک در آن متولد شد. شخصیت قدرتمند مجسمه حقیقت که یادآور تضاد عمدی با میکلانژ بین قسمت‌های صاف و ناتمام و کشش فیزیکی ظریف پیکره‌های زن روبنسس را میتوان شگفت‌انگیزی مجسمه سازی باروک دانست. این مطمئناً شخصی ترین مجسمه جیان لورنزو برنینی است. برنینی اثری را طراحی کرد که قرار بود یادگار هنر مجسمه سازی او باشد. حقیقت فاش شده توسط زمان. شکل زمان که برای قسمت بالای ترکیب در نظر گرفته شده بود هرگز اجرا نشد. این کار زمانی انجام شد که برنینی دوران سختی را در دربار پاپ می‌گذراند، زیرا او به اشتباه توسط دشمنان خود متهم به ایجاد مشکلات ساختاری در سنت پیتر شد. برنینی کار مقدماتی حقیقت را در حدود سال 1645 میلادی در زمان حساس، یعنی پس از مرگ پاپ اوربان هشتم آغاز کرد و تا سال 1652 میلادی تقریباً کامل کرد. اما برنینی در سال 1665 میلادی دوباره قصد خود را برای اضافه کردن شکل زمان به گروه اعلام کرد. برنینی در وصیت‌نامه خود حقیقت را به عنوان هشدار ابدی به پسر بزرگش وصیت کرد. این اثر تا سال 1924 در خانه برنینی و وراث او باقی ماند و سپس به گالری بورگس منتقل شد.
Another important painter was Domenichino Zampieri, generally known as Il Domenichino, who settled in Bologna. Beginning art students might be surprised at how painters from one part of Europe traveled extensively, settling for a time or permanently in a different city or country. Now, you've just seen how Rene depicted John the Evangelist. Here's how Domenichino dealt with John. This picture, painted toward the end of the 1620s, is like Renaissance painting in that it contains elements that are not descriptive of an event, but rather symbolic of the character. John's hand rests lightly on an open scroll, a reference to his gospel. In the background, an eagle hands him a quill, the traditional writing instrument. The eagle is John's symbolic sign, referring to the high soaring thought of his gospel. The chalice with the serpent refers to the legend that John was sentenced to drink a cup of poisoned wine, but the poison left the cup in the form of a snake. Carlo Maratta, creator of the martyrdom of St. Andrew, is a representative of the Roman school, but he was much influenced by the artists of Bologna, particularly by Guido Reni and to some extent Domenichino. His work demonstrates the same technical skill in brush strokes and color choices. The martyrdom takes place outdoors, making it necessary to include details of the setting. The central group is a skillfully knit composition of twisting and leaning figures, a common Baroque element in an otherwise classical painting. St. James the Apostle was painted in the 1730s by Pompeo Battoni and has the clear light and smooth modeling of classicism. James, shown before a landscape, turns to look at us as though interrupted in his travels. One of his attributes is the pilgrim staff in his hand. Battoni is remembered today as a portrait painter, but he was active in history paintings as well as mythological scenes. Also representing the Roman school are the works of Giovanni Battista Salvi, known as Il Sassoferrato, after his birthplace in Umbria. He may have studied with Domenichino, who certainly had a profound influence on him. Examples of the Madonna in prayer abound, but the Virgin Annunciate, of which our composition is a splendid example, are much rarer. Mary is listening to the message of the angel Gabriel announcing the birth of Christ. Salvi's style exemplifies the classical ideal in its clear drawing, idealized face, and smooth modeling. His unique quality is a sort of dryness in his color. The entire surface looks matte, not shiny. His perfect blending of values is seen particularly well in the glow of light that illuminates the Virgin. In the young Christ, Salvi is indebted to Francesco Albani, who was possibly the first to attempt this subject. It has been copied with great precision. Note the bright red of the clothes, the brilliance with which it is painted. Although only a small picture, it can hold its own in a gallery full of large paintings.
How can you look at a painting or sculpture and know that it was made during the period that we call the Baroque?
How do you recognize the Baroque style? Let's start by looking at this very important sculpture by Bernini of the biblical story of David who defeats the giant Goliath.
I'm standing in front of the sculpture and I want to duck. This man is about to launch a rock.
He's giving this every ounce of energy he's got.
Look at his eyebrows, the way they're knit together. Look at the way that he's biting his lips. The artist is observing the human body, understands all of the naturalistic lessons that had been gained during the Renaissance, but is putting them towards an intense emotionalism.
This is a position of the body that could only be like this for a split second.
The body itself has broken with the stability that had been so characteristic of the Renaissance. Bernini's body is wound up and is about to release its energy. He's like a spring that's taut. And you're right, his body could never hold this position for more than a moment.
We see a diagonal.
And it's not just straight diagonals. These are interrelated arcing diagonals. And so there is this tremendous energy that's not only the result of the representation of his body, but it's the very forms and lines that the artist is creating in stone.
And that's part of the way that the figure involves us. It moves into our space. With Michelangelo's David, we maintain a polite distance. Its ideal beauty is there for us to contemplate. But Baroque art does something different. Instead of appealing to our minds, it appeals to our bodies.
It appeals to our emotions.
Michelangelo's David looks like a god.
Well, Michelangelo is largely unwilling to sacrifice the pure linear qualities of his figure. Notice the way in which the line of his body is almost unobstructed, whereas Bernini is absolutely willing to cross his body with his arms, with all of those diagonals that energize, but also move away from that notion of the ideal. There's another important aspect that the complexity of Bernini's composition enables, and that is a greater set of contrast between light and dark. Michelangelo's David, because he is so planar, the marble is all available to the light, and so you don't get deep shadow. With Bernini, because the form is crossing itself, you get these contrasts between highlights and shadows that further activate the sculpture.
So how do we see this in painting?
One of the great examples is to look at the Italian Baroque painter Caravaggio.
This is an amazing painting and incredibly powerful, very much like Bernini's David. We're confronted with something very close to us. Here is St. Peter, who asked to be crucified upside down because he said he wasn't worthy to die the way that Christ had died. So here we see Peter nailed to the cross. The bottom of the cross almost feels like it's so close that we could touch it. So the same way that Bernini's David moved into our space, Caravaggio is using foreshortening.
But it also creates an incredible sense of instability. Look at the way that that cross is just being raised up, and we're not sure that the massiveness of Peter and of the lumber is too heavy, whether or not he may fall with a giant thud, that everything feels contingent and in motion.
And here we have the diagonal of the cross, but also another diagonal formed by the back of the figure who's helping to raise the cross and the figure underneath who's raising it with his back. And so we have crisscrossing diagonals, which is also a very common feature of Baroque art.
It's interesting to compare this to the Bernini sculpture because Bernini was working in the round. Here, the artist is creating an illusion of form, of mass, and one of the ways he's able to do that is to create these sharp contrasts between light and shadow, which, just like the Bernini sculpture, is creating a sense of vividness and energy. So we've got this dark background and these brilliantly highlighted figures, creating this sense of veracity that we could reach out and touch them.
The whole thing about Renaissance painting was there was an illusion of space, there was architecture, there was landscape behind the figures. But here Caravaggio gives us darkness and everything is pushed to the foreground.
So it's emotional, it's intimate, it feels real, it feels immediate.
And it gets to us in our bodies. Look at how close Peter's feet are, and we can see the nails that have been driven through his feet. We can see the nails in his hand. There's an interest in making us emotionally involved even in the violence here.
I'm interested in the way that the center of gravity has been shifted and is being raised up so that there is this instability.
A way to drive this point home is just to compare this to a painting by Raphael from the High Renaissance, where we have an emphasis on stability and balance. The figures in this painting by Raphael are in the shape of a pyramid, which is the most stable of forms. There's a clear light on the figures. They're situated within this three-dimensional space. We can move from foreground to middle ground to deep background.
And Raphael is enjoying the opportunity to give us as much information as he can, not only about the three figures in the foreground, but about the natural world beyond them, whereas Caravaggio is being much more careful about what we're going to focus on.
Look at that beautiful face of the Madonna. She's not a particular person. She is the divine mother of God.
But Peter is an actual individual that we're seeing. This is a particular man at a particular point in his life.
And there's dirt and clothes that are disheveled. And this is much more of the real world than we ever see in the High Renaissance.
So all of the art that we've looked at has been Italian. Can we see these same characteristics in art that's being produced north of the Alps?
We can certainly see it in the art of Rubens. If we looked at Rubens' raising of the cross, we would see a diagonal. We would see dramatic contrasts of light and dark.
What if we were looking at artists who lived in a Protestant context?
A lot of the characteristics we've been describing, these are characteristics that we associate with Catholic Baroque art that sought to energize believers. In Holland, we're looking at paintings that are very different than the altarpieces from Catholic Europe, and that's because we're in a Protestant country where artists are no longer commissioned to paint altarpieces for the church. So let's take something that seems like the opposite of the Baroque art we've been talking about. Let's take Vermeer's Woman with a Water Pitcher.
Instead of seeing a biblical scene, we're seeing a common domestic scene, a wealthy woman in her home in the north of Europe.
So what makes this Baroque?
Everything in this painting is quiet. The light has a subtlety to it that is very different from the drama and violence of the light that we saw in Caravaggio. Instead, the artist seems to be in love with the very subtle modulation of light, the very subtle gradations of tone. Look especially at the way that the light filters through her headdress.
Or under her right arm as she opens that window.
We see a woman surrounded by rectilinear forms. The rectangle of the window, of the map on the upper right, the rectangle of the table to the lower right. She inhabits that space between, but she's moving and resisting the stability and geometry that is set up by the environment around her.
She's picking up or putting down the picture, opening the window, this caught moment in between. And even the light has a sense of being in between, of the light coming in from the outside, of the light in the interior. And that interest in light is key to Baroque art, whether it's Caravaggio's drama or the subtlety of light in Vermeer.
This is a painting that is about subtle transition, and whether or not it's the subtle transition of the light or the subtle transition of her attention from the basin and pitcher to the window.
We are close to her. We feel as though we could reach out and feel that rug that covers the table. So that closeness that we saw in Caravaggio and Bernini is still here.
Let's move through all of these different types of paintings. How do we recognize the Baroque in 17th century Dutch landscape?
Here's Ruysdael's beautiful painting of the bleaching grounds. But notice it's not an ideal landscape. This is the landscape of Ruysdael's hometown of Haarlem.
We call this a landscape, but this is really about those clouds. And look at those huge voluminous forms that are moving across that sky. I can see them forming and unforming before my very eyes. This is still about transition. And look at the way that those clouds cast shadows that create these alternating fields across the land below.
So Baroque art is about time. It's about effects of light, whether that's dramatic or more subtle. It's about involving the viewer, of moving into our space, of breaking down the barrier between us and the work of art. It's about the use of the diagonal, of a sense of energy and drama, sometimes subtle drama, but still drama.
And for me, it's always about a sense of direct relationship with the subject.
جنبش هنری باروک، سبک یک دوران، قسمت دوم. کلیسا، شورای ترنت و امر قدسی در هنر باروک. در طول قرن 17 هنرهای تجسمی سه متولی داشت: کلیسای کاتولیک، خاندان سلطنتی و طبقه ممتاز، اعم از اشراف یا افراد صرفاً ثروتمند. هر یک از این سه گروه از هنر به نفع خود استفاده می‌کردند تا شأن اجتماعی خود را بزرگ و موجه جلوه دهند. بر اساس نظریه وایزباخ، تصویر امر قدسی در هنر باروک مرکب از 5 عنصر است. 1. سلوک باطنی، تجربه ارتباط نزدیک با خدا. 2. ریاضت، مبارزه با نفس به مثابه بخشی از سلوک دینی. 3. شجاعت. 4. شهوانیت. 5. قساوت. این مفاهیم مستقیما با نوشته‌های صوفی‌های بزرگ به ویژه سنت ترزا اویلایی مرتبط بود. آثار هنری که مبتنی بر این ایده‌ها بودند، قصد داشتند مردم را با توسل به احساساتشان به کیش خود دعوت کنند. شورای ترنت با طرح یک نظریه تکمیلی توصیه کرد که هنر قدسی باید واضح، موجز و به آسانی قابل فهم باشد و از همه امکانات آموزشی خود حداکثر استفاده را ببرد. هنر قدسی باید تفسیر واقع انگارانه داشته باشد و به جای توسل به عقل با توسل به حواس ایمان دینی را تقویت کند. این جنبه هنر باروک به اصیل‌ترین شکل در ناتورالیسم جلوه کرد. ماتیا پرتی، شهادت سن سباستیان 1657 میلادی، موزه کاپوتی مونته، ناپل. در این نقاشی روح قهرمانی با ریاضت مذهبی درآمیخته و باعث شده که رنج سن سباستیان به واسطه عشق او به مسیح اطلاع یابد. در این تصویر هنرمند بسیاری از شگردهای متعارف باروک را به کار گرفته است، مانند ترسیم پیکر مقدس به شکل مورب و انتخاب زاویه دید پایین که به سوژه عظمت می‌بخشد و به آن حالتی اساطیری می‌دهد. طراحی پیکری قدرتمند به همراه حالتی بیمارگونه در شخصیت سن سباستیان موجب می شود که مخاطب خود را در مرتبه‌ای دور از این قدیس که یک مسیحی ایدئال است احساس کند. کلیسا از هنرهای تجسمی هم برای تثبیت قدرت جدید خود و هم برای آموزش بهره گرفت. تمثال‌های فراوانی از پاپ وجود داشت که تجسم‌هایی از فضائل از جمله عدالت، خرد، بردباری، میانروی، ایمان، امید و احسان او را احاطه کرده بودند. آثار دیگری مانند کرسی پتروی اسقف اعظم، اثر برنینی، اقتدار پاپ را به عنوان خلیفه خداوند تحکیم می‌کرد. نهاد سلطنت. همچنین در هنر غیردینی ایده‌های انتزاعی به تصویر کشیده می‌شد. ایماژهایی که از اساطیر برگرفته شده بود اغلب برای نشان دادن فضایل خاندان سلطنتی به کار می‌رفت و چهره پادشاه همانند هرکول یا خدایی دیگر ترسیم می‌شد. به علاوه تمثال‌ها و پیکرهای اسب سوار که نشانگر قدرت سلطنت بودند، نمونه دیگر از این رویکرد نسبت به هنر هستند. این خود بزرگبینی در مقبره‌های خاندان سلطنتی به اوج خود رسید و در آن ارزش‌های زمینی و آسمانی به یکدیگر پیوست تا افتخار و شکوه پادشاه بیشتر جلوه کند. تازه ثروتمندان، نوکیسه ها. هنرهای تجسمی در این دوره مشتمل بر آثاری بودند مختص ثروتمندان تازه به دوران رسیده‌ای که میل به اظهار وجود داشتند. بیشتر این ثروتمندان نوکیسه هلندی بودند. جمهوری هلند یک مرکز عمده تجاری بود که ثروتمندان طبقه متوسط آن می‌خواستند دنیای خودشان را در آثار هنری مشاهده کنند. انواع نقاشی مانند منظره، طبیعت بیجان و پورتره‌های جمعی در این محیط رونق یافت. تابلوهای نقاشی، صحنه‌های زندگی روزمره، دارایی‌ها و فعالیت‌های روزانه طبقه متوسط هلند را نشان می‌داد. و همینطور منظره‌ها و چشم‌اندازهای شهری، نمای ییلاق‌ها و شهرهای آنان را عیناً بازآفرینی می‌کرد. نقاشی باروک. به طور کلی ویژگی‌های اصلی جلوه‌های نقاشی باروک عبارتند از درام، رنگ‌های عمیق، نور دراماتیک، سایه‌های تند و پس‌زمینه‌های تیره. در حالی که هدف هنر رنسانس برجسته کردن آرامش و عقلانیت بود، هنرمندان باروک بر تضادها، شور و تنش شدید تأکید داشتند و اغلب ترجیح می‌دادند لحظه قبل از یک رویداد را به جای وقوع آن به تصویر بکشند. برجسته‌ترین نقاشان باروک از هلند، ایتالیا و اسپانیا هستند. آنها عموماً دغدغه موضوعات انسانی یا موضوعات و روایت صحنه‌های مشابه را داشتند. حوزه‌های قدرت رنسانس همچنان بر جهتگیری هنری در فرهنگ‌های آنها جاری بود و متعاقب آن بیشتر سفارش‌ها پورترهای سلطنتی، صحنه‌های مذهبی، تصویرگری زندگی و محیط سلطنتی بود. با این حال با باروک در تاریخ و نقاشی‌های منظره و همچنین پورترها، صحنه‌های ژانر و طبیعت بیجان ظهور کرد. چنین نقاشی‌هایی به طور خاص در هلند شکوفا شدند. نقاشان بزرگ باروک هلندی مانند رامبراند، یوهانس ورمیر و پیتر پول رومانس بود. تسلط آنها بر شیوه ترسیم خانه‌های سلطنتی در سراسر اروپا را به دنبال آنها روان کرد. استعداد نقاشان هلندی آنقدر زیاد بود که کارل کلاوس و ویکتوریا چارلز گفتند او یعنی روبنس تنها کسی است که در بازنمایی درام به میکلانج نزدیک شد و روبنس به عنوان یک رنگشناس حتی شاید بر میکلانج سایه انداخت. در رقابت با هنرمندان هلندی و اسپانیایی در سطح دیگو ولاسکز، نقاشان باروک ایتالیایی از میراث سبک رنسانس و منیریسم سرشار شدند. دو تا از مکاتب نقاشی پیشرو در ایتالیا عبارت بودند از التقاط خانواده کاراچی و آکادمی آنها از یک سو و طبیعت گرایی از سوی دیگر. سبکی انقلابی که توسط میکل آنجلو مرسی دا کاراواجو پایه‌گذاری شد و موانعی بین هنر مذهبی و مردمی را شکست. او از آرمانی کردن چهره‌های مذهبی یا کلاسیک پرهیز کرد. مردان و زنان معمولی را با لباس روزمره به تصویر کشید. مجسمه باروک. بسیاری از هنرمندان بزرگ باروک معمار و همینطور مجسمه ساز بودند. ویژگی‌های مشترکی را می‌توان در آثار آنها مشاهده کرد. یک شباهت کلیدی طرد خطوط مستقیم است که منجر به افزایش خلق مجسمه‌هایی شد که در آنها بر حرکت و بیان تاکید می‌شد. مجسمه سازی باروک عمدتاً به بازنمایی صحنه‌های کتاب مقدس پرداخت که مورد توجه خاص کلیسا بود. اما همچنین به خاطر اعتقادات خود مجسمه سازان بسیاری خارج از سفارش آنها نیز به تجسم روایت‌های کتاب مقدس پرداختند. خواه صحنه‌هایی از عهد قدیم باشد و یا عهد جدید. اشتیاق اکثر مجسمه سازان باروک تجسم اندوه و حرکت بود. چهره برجسته مجسمه سازی باروک مطمئناً هنرمند ایتالیایی جیان لورنزو برنیدی بود.
Welcome back to the Accessible Art History YouTube channel. This week, we are going to be comparing two of the most popular time periods in art history, Renaissance and Baroque. Although the pieces often cover the same subjects, their styles are actually quite different. We're going to explore 3 ways to show these differences, so keep on watching to find out more. Before we get started though, let's refresh our memories on what the Renaissance and Baroque eras were all about. The Renaissance came first, lasting from around 1300 to 1550. For Western Europe, this signaled a rebirth. This was due to the fact that the eastern half of the Roman Empire was conquered by the Ottomans. Many scientists, artists, and scholars fled to the west and brought previously lost knowledge with them. In addition, archaeological digs became popular, unearthing classical art for the first time in centuries. Artists like Raphael, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo were inspired by these developments and created some of the most famous art in history. In the mid to late 16th century, a new artistic style began to sweep over Europe. It was called Baroque, meaning complex or different. There is some debate on the actual reasoning, but these seem to be the two most popular theories. This period was marked by the Counter-Reformation, or when the Catholic Church used art and architecture to reinvigorate itself against the rising Protestant numbers. They hired artists such as Peter Paul Rubens, Caravaggio, Bernini, and Velázquez to create art that would celebrate the history and miracles of the Church in a way that would draw people back to the true faith. Now that we've established some background information, let's dive deeper into the differences between Renaissance and Baroque art. First off, these two styles utilized completely different techniques of composition. During the Renaissance, the goal was to achieve balance. Every detail was meticulously placed. This can be seen in Leonardo da Vinci's fresco, The Last Supper. He painted it around 1495 for the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, Italy. Christ sits at the center of the table, and the vanishing point is right above his head. On either side, there are 6 disciples in various states of shock. Behind the group are 3 windows, 1 large and 2 small, representing the Holy Trinity. Each element of this work is perfectly aligned to create a mathematical composition. In sharp contrast to Leonardo's work is Caravaggio's painting, The Entombment of Christ. This is one of his most famous pieces, and he created it between 1603 and 1604. Today, this work hangs in the Vatican museums. Caravaggio encompasses the tragedy and drama of the moment by creating a strong diagonal composition. The viewer's eye is drawn upward from the left corner, from Christ's dead body, to the men placing him in the tomb, and finally to the 2 Marys, his mother and Magdalene, who are mourning. The scene twists upward, creating a gradual unveiling of the story. In essence, Renaissance art used balance to lay the story out on the table, no pun intended, while Baroque art allows a story to unfold slowly as the viewer takes in the piece. This difference can likely be explained by the fact that the papacy, who commissioned Caravaggio's work, wanted to remind people of the sacrifices that Christ made on humanity's behalf. It was a calculated way to bring people back to the faith. Created in 1507, Raphael's La Belle Jardinière is a wonderful example of Renaissance Madonna painting. Although it was commissioned by a Sienese nobleman named Fabrizio Segardi, this work now hangs in the Louvre. It features a beautiful young Madonna in a lush landscape. She watches over her son Jesus and his cousin John the Baptist. They are both infants in this depiction, though they still have their iconographic markers. Throughout the work, there is uniform light. It is soft and warm, speaking to a lovely spring or summer day. It also symbolizes the holiness of the 3 figures. Their presence casts that light onto humanity itself. Although there are examples of contrasting light in Renaissance art, such as Leonardo da Vinci's Madonna of the Rocks, they are far less common. Once again, we are turning to Caravaggio for an examination of Baroque art. This painting is called the Madonna di Loreto and was created between 1604 and 1606. It serves as decoration in the Cavaletti Chapel in the Church of Sant'Agostino in Rome. In this work, the Madonna stands holding the infant Jesus. There is barely any identification, just a small golden halo. In front of Mary, there are 2 pilgrims. They have fallen to their knees in worship at the divine figures in front of them. Caravaggio uses light to his advantage to tell the story. The Virgin is partially shrouded by a shadow, adding to the mystery of her divinity. Her face is illuminated, allowing the viewer to take in her full glory. The pilgrims themselves are partially obscured by the shadow she cast, showing they aren't supposed to be the focus of the work. When shown side by side, the difference in lighting becomes abundantly clear, and once again, they tell viewers a lot about the motives behind the pieces. In the Renaissance, it was all about classical beauty. The Madonna is fair and handsome, while the 2 holy infants are plump and adorable. In order to convey this, the lighting had to be perfect and even. But in the Baroque era, it was all about the story that was being told. The light was manipulated in such a way that it created a beginning, a middle, and an end. Essentially, it was made to be a restoration of a narrative. Our final difference between Renaissance and Baroque art is the utilization, or lack thereof, of emotion. And for this, we are turning to sculpture. First up, Michelangelo's Pietà. This is one of his earliest works, sculpted around 1498 to 99, and is housed in St. Peter's Basilica. The Pietà is one of the most common themes in art. It shows the Virgin Mary cradling Christ after he died on the cross. However, despite this tragic moment, in this work, both figures are quite serene. Mary looks down in reverence, and Christ could simply be sleeping. Rational calm seems to be a strange choice, but when you consider where the statue is placed, it makes a bit more sense. It was meant to be an aid in worship in one of the holiest places in the Catholic world. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, like his predecessor Michelangelo, was often in the employ of the Catholic Church. In fact, they commissioned him to create this piece. It is called the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. He sculpted it for the Cornaro Chapel in the Church of Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome between 1647 and 52. To say this work is dramatic would be an understatement. From the left, an angel swoops down to pierce St. Teresa with his arrow. She throws her head back in both pleasure and pain. Behind the pair, golden sunbeams rain down. The sculpture tells a story, and an amazing one at that. It speaks to the mystical element of the Catholic Church, an excellent subject for the Counter-Reformation. Although both of these sculptures depict holy women, they are worlds apart. The Virgin Mary is the epitome of containment. Despite having just lost her son, she has no grief on her face. Her sorrow is buried within. However, St. Teresa expels her emotion with reckless abandon. She is the opposite of contained. The story of her ecstasy bursts forth out of the space and threatens to invade the viewers. Once again, we see the theme of rational knowledge versus a dramatic beckoning of the truth. Today, Renaissance and Baroque works are some of the most popular in the study of art history, and with very good reason. Despite their differences, or perhaps because of them, they are able to resonate with viewers. They connect with different parts of the human mind and our desire to understand the world around us.
Luca Giordano is one of the most important late Baroque painters. He'd be entitled to our attention if for no other reason than the sheer quantity of his work. Besides painting walls and ceilings in palaces and churches, he's said to have created more than 5,000 easel works, many of tremendous size. Christ cleansing the temple, more than 7 feet high and almost 10 feet wide, is by no means his largest. Giordano trained with his father, and while still a boy, he showed amazing ability. His father, greedy for the money that Luca's work brought, is said to have screamed at him constantly, "Luca fa presto," that is, "Luke, do it quick." Hence the nickname that followed him through life, Luca fa presto. This painting belongs to a group from around 1660. Notice the large figures in dramatic action brought close to the front to bring us into the scene. Note in this work also the dramatic contrast of light and shadow. Though Giordano has replaced the dark background with a light one, the sun shining in the courtyard beyond, his color is less dramatic because it's modified by a golden haze that repeats the sunlight in so many Venetian paintings. The feeling of chaotic activity is created by crowding several layers of people close to the front, busy with a variety of gestures. These chaotic details overlay a well-composed structure. The sense of catching the action in a split second is heightened by Giordano's dry brush technique. By leaving brush strokes exposed instead of blending them, he creates a sort of blur which we see in photographs of rapid movement. His loose way of handling paint prefigures techniques of the 19th century. His willingness to leave us with the merest suggestion of detail in minor figures focuses our attention on the action. Alessandro Turchi has been lightly regarded, it seems to me, because he never developed a consistent style. He's associated with the high Baroque. He went through a naturalistic phase while he was in Rome, and he finally developed a highly polished classical style, which marks his later works. However, through it all, I feel that he retained a sensuous quality that somehow comes through as entirely his own. Note the dark background, with the scene dramatically lit from the side by a light whose source is not easily explained. His classical idealism is seen in the figures with their quiet yet eloquent gestures. There's also a strong naturalistic look to the faces. Still, in Baroque fashion, he focuses most strongly on the relationship between the characters psychologically as well as physically. They interact with each other. This picture, dramatic in pose, is very distinctly Alessandro Turchi. The next two paintings belong to a series of 6 illustrating scenes from the life of Joseph. Giovanni Battista Carlone was an unusual painter. He had the ability to study the works of many great masters without exactly copying any of their styles. Genoa had been the meeting place of all the Baroque trends, and Carlone borrowed from all of them. He places his characters in front of a rather dark background, pushing the action to the forefront. The surviving mannerist element is the drama. Each person reacts to the events in his own personal manner, revealed in facial expressions and posture. Some are exaggerated almost to the point of melodrama. Carlone's loose style of applying paint leaves brushstrokes showing unblended. The result is a texture, not of the objects painted, but of the paint itself. This method was also used by Rembrandt and would result during the 19th century in the Impressionist technique. Sometimes I think it would be better to describe Baroque as a period, a time slot in the history of art, rather than trying to describe the style of Baroque art. How do you describe the characteristics of storms? There are many kinds: rainstorms, snowstorms, hailstorms, windstorms, electrical storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, cyclones. Would it not be all right to describe Baroque as an art storm and let the details go? But the art historians and specialists won't let us off that easily. The original meaning of the word Baroque was irregular, contorted, grotesque, and it came to be applied to art which opposed the classical rules, different, unregulated, and taking its own form. The religious art of the High Baroque was a major tool of the Counter-Reformation, emphasizing biblical characters and saints, often in ecstatic visions. It attempts to woo the Protestant back to the Catholic Church by emotional appeal to its miraculous history, or to frighten with references to the Last Judgment. But the Reformation had quickened the minds of men and women. Even the peasant population had been affected to some degree, and the circulation of the printed Bible had brought the light of the gospel into the hearts of many. The medieval superstitious fears that the Roman Church had used were not now so effective, at least in Northern Europe, where the Reformation had its impact. Call to mind visions of the heavens opened, masses of angels, martyrdoms, battles, and pretentious piety. And you have Baroque.
اگر بخوایم بحثی در مورد باروک داشته باشیم، نخست باید این بحث رو مطرح بکنیم که باروک رو به عنوان یک سبک نگاه میکنیم یا باروک رو به عنوان یک وضعیت. دو تا تفسیر وجود داره. یک تفسیر که تفسیر کلاسیک هستش، معتقده که ما با سبک باروک روبرو هستیم و سبک باروک به منزله یکی از سبک‌های تاریخ هنره. اما دیدگاه بعدی که دیدگاه نیمه دوم سده 20 نگاهی هستش که باروک رو یک وضعیت میدونه و در مقام یک وضعیت میاد اون رو تحلیل میکنه و تفسیر میکنه. ببینید اصطلاح باروک یک اصطلاح قرن 19 هستش، یعنی مورخان هنر سده 19 اومدن و در تقسیم بندی که برای مکتب‌های تاریخ هنر در نظر گرفتن باروک رو به عنوان یک مکتب شناختن. اما اگر باروک رو به عنوان یک وضعیت بشناسیم باید اون رو برگردونیم به یک نمایشنامه تمثیلی که توسط یک ادیب اسپانیایی با نام کالدرون دولا بارسا نوشته شده تحت عنوان تئاتر کبیر جهان یا تئاتر کبیر عالم. در اون نمایشنامه یه ایده مهمی مطرح میشه که اون ایده مهم رو ما در مکتب باروک و در وضعیت باروک میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم. اون ایده این هستش که وقتی که ما با زندگی روبرو میشیم، زندگی به منزله بازی هستش و این نمایشنامه به ارائه افرادی میپردازه که همچون بازیگران یک صحنه نمایش در پیشگاه خداوند رفتار میکنند، در پیشگاه میزبان ملکوتی خودشون بازی میکنند. و ایده این نمایش این هستش که جهان همچون صحنه نمایشه و ما یک خصلت بسیار مهمی که در مکتب باروک میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم همینه، یعنی به تعبیری تئاترگونگی رو در این مکتب میتونیم ببینیم. بنابراین اگر بخوایم باروک رو ذیل یک استعاره تحلیل بکنیم، استعاره جهان به منزله صحنه نمایشه که در دوره باروک یک امر رایج بود. از آخر سده 16 تا آخر سده 18 ما شاهد این روی کرد بودیم. باروک مظهر ایده ها و مفاهیم متعارضه، یعنی مفاهیمی که هم بر صحنه نمایش آشکار میشن و هم در پشت صحنه اونها رو میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم. مثلا بحث واقعیت و نمود، بحث شکوه و بحث زهدگرایی، بحث قدرت و بحث ضعف که اینها خصلت‌های بارز باروک هستند. از یک طرف ما در باروک با تزیینات بسیار زیادی روبرو میشیم، تزییناتی که اغراق آمیز هستند. به عنوان مثال ما در نقاشی سقف‌های کلیسا، در نقاشی سقف‌های کاخ‌ها با یک پرسپکتیو خاصی شاهد این هستیم که در اونجا با نقاشی‌های تزیینی روبرو هستیم، نقاشی‌های تاریخی روبرو هستیم. و از جهت دیگه یکی از مرگندیش‌ترین هنرهایی که ما میشناسیم هنر باروک هستش و در طبیعت بیجانهای دوره باروک و اصلا اون مسئله و اون شعار اساسی که به لاتین هم بیان میکنن، یعنی مرگ رو به یاد بیاور. یعنی از طرفی جمجمه رو میبینیم، ساعت شنی رو میبینیم، میوه های فاسد رو میبینیم که یادآور مرگ هستن. از یه جهت شکوه و جلال زمینی رو میبینیم و از طرف دیگه مرگ رو ملاحظه میکنیم. باروک خصلت‌های متقابل و خصلت‌های متعارض داره و این تعارضات هستن که در هنر باروک جالب توجه هستن. ببینید نکته‌ای که وجود داره، شرایط سیاسی و شرایط اجتماعی باروک رو هم در این میان باید در نظر داشت. شرایط سیاسی و شرایط اجتماعی باروک مثل حاکمیت پاپ‌ها در این دوره و تأثیری که اونها در نظام‌های شاهنشاهی داشتن، این مسئله رو میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم که در معماری باروک که معماری مذهبی اهمیت داره، یعنی کلیسا، و دیگری هم معماری سکولار یعنی کاخها اهمیت پیدا میکنن و در هر دو مورد ما با اون شکوه، با اون تزیینات و با اون زرق و برق روبرو هستیم و هر دوی اینها رو میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم و مشاهده بکنیم و ببینیم اینها رو. بنابراین نکته‌ای که در مورد باروک وجود داره و مؤلفه های بنیادین باروک به منزله یک فرهنگ رو میسازن، غیر از این شکوه و تزیینات، غیر از این خصلت تئاترگونه، نظام‌های بسته آموزشی هستن که در اونجا میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم. سرسپردگی به کلیسا و حکومت، دفاعی که سرسختانه از ناسیونالیسم صورت میگیره و به خصلت‌های باروک رو میسازه. از جمله ما در معماری باروک میبینیم که این مؤلفه ها دخیل هستند و این مؤلفه ها رو میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم. اما در نقاشی و هنرهای دیداری اگر بخوایم به باروک بپردازیم، نقاشی باروک تحت تاثیر فن خطابه است یا رتوریک. یعنی نکته‌ای که در اینجا وجود داره اینه که ما در فن خطابه معیارهایی داریم، ابزارهایی داریم، مثل احساس، مثل تحریک کردن طرف مقابل، مثل بیگانگی، مثل اقناع که هدف فن خطابه هستش و این مستقیما وارد مکتب باروک میشه، وارد سبک باروک میشه و نظام آموزشی که در هنرهای دیداری برساخته میشه، این نظام آموزشی تحت تأثیر این فن خطابه یا ریتوریک است. کافی استش که به عنوان یک نمونه درخشان دوره باروک مثلا خود کاراواجو رو ملاحظه بکنیم، رمبراند رو ملاحظه بکنیم، بلاسکز رو ملاحظه بکنیم، یعنی سه هنرمندی که در ایتالیا، در هلند و در اسپانیا بودن، یا در مجسمه سازی این دوره برنینی و از جمله اون مجسمه درخشانش در روم یعنی خلسه قدیس ترزا رو ملاحظه بکنیم. در اینها مواجه میشه مخاطب با یک سبک اغراق شده، با یک سبکی که هدفش اقناع هستش و در این اقناع به دنبال این هستش که تاثیرگذار بر مخاطبش باشه و مخاطب رو در مقابل این اقناع قرار بده. اما آنچه که نزد هنرمندان دوره باروک وجود داره مفهوم ایده هستش. هنرمندان بر روی ایده ها متمرکز هستند و ایده ها از طریق صحنه های مختلف که اون صحنه های نمایشی است منتقل میشن. بنابراین ما در نظریه هنر دوره باروک با اون مفهوم ایده روبرو هستیم به طور خاص و همونطور که اروین پانوفسکی در اون کتاب ایده خودش به تطور مفهوم ایده در هنر پرداخته، شاید بتونیم شروع و یک آغازی رو از دوره باروک ببینیم. ببینید تحلیل های جدید در مورد باروک به ما این نکته رو میگن که باروک برخلاف اون رویکرد قبلی دوره انحطاط یا دوره زوال هنر نبوده. مطابق یک کلیشه رایج باروک رو یک دوره منحط میدونن، باروک رو یک دوره زوال هنر میدونن پس از رنسانس. اما تحلیل های جدید این مسئله رو نشون میده که نه تنها در باروک ما با یک زوال و انحطاط مواجه نیستیم، بلکه در این دوره به جای اینکه با زوال و انحطاط مواجه باشیم با یک فضای جدید و با مؤلفه های جدیدی در این زمینه روبرو هستیم که این مؤلفه های جدید رو میتونیم بهش بپردازیم. نظریه پردازی مثل بلوری که یک نظریه پرداز بسیار مهم برای دوره باروک بوده، مواردی رو مطرح میکنه که این موارد به طور طبیعی ممکنه امروز برای ما متعصبانه باشن، اما در اون دوران یک وجه کاملا نوآورانه داشتن و این وجه نوآورانش رو میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم. یا هنرمندانی که در دوره باروک بودن ممکن بود که در زمان خودشون خیلی محل توجه نباشن، اما بعداً در طول سده‌های بعدی اینها کشف شدن. به عنوان مثال کاراواجو در زمانه خودش و در سده بعد از فوتش هنرمندی بود که بسیار مورد انتقاد قرار می گرفت، اما بعداً تحقیق‌های بعدی نشون داد که کاراواجو یک نقاش برجسته‌ای هستش که مؤلفه‌های ابداعی رو در کارش میتونیم ملاحظه بکنیم. در مورد سایر هنرمندان باروک هم همین خصلت وجود داره. مثلا با مفهوم سلف پورتره به عنوان خودکاوی در این دوره روبرو میشیم. کافی است که من از رمبراند مثال بزنم، یا مفهومی به نام فراتصویر یا فرانقاشی، متاپیکچر، که یک تأمل نظری از طریق تصویر در خود فهم تصویر و محتوای تصویر هستش، که خب طبیعتاً یک مثال خیلی شاخصش تابلوی ندیمه های ولاسکس هستش و نمونه های دیگه که همه این نمونه ها در کنار هم باروک رو غیر از یک مکتب تبدیل میکنه به یک وضعیت.